Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, to a time when empires rose and fell on the strength of calloused hands and unwavering, often unwilling human will. Imagine, if you can, the chill of a pre-dawn wind whipping across a desolate, windswept ridge, not a single light from your smart device to pierce the inky blackness. The air hums with the low growl of thousands of distant voices, the rhythmic clang of stone on stone, and the sharp crack of a whip sounds that would become the soundtrack to your very short, very arduous new life. You're not on a cozy couch, mind you. You're standing on the precipice of an impossible task, a project so vast it defies modern comprehension, under conditions that make your worst Monday morning feel like a spa day. You're about to discover why you probably wouldn't last a single day as a worker on the Great Wall of China. And let's be honest, given the historical survival rates, that's not just a cheeky title. It's a grim reality check. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. One moment you were in your village, perhaps dreaming of a simple life tending fields. The next you're just another pair of hands in a sea of conscripts, shuffled forward, smelling of fear and unwashed bodies, towards an imposing, impossible structure. The sun hasn't even bothered to peek over the jagged mountain peaks. But the workday has begun, not with a gentle alarm, but with a guttural shout and a rough shove from a hulking, leather-clad overseer. You blink, trying to clear the haze of sleep and disorientation, and what greets your eyes is a sight that would steal the breath from even the most seasoned construction worker. The wall. Not a neatly restored, tourist-friendly section, but a raw, unyielding serpent of earth, rock, and sweat, snaking endlessly across the horizon, disappearing into the mist in both directions. It's overwhelming, utterly colossal, and shockingly, you're now part of it. You're given a crude, heavy basket woven from reeds and a short, chipped pickaxe. No safety briefing, no hard hat, definitely no ergonomic assessments. Your uniform is whatever threadbare clothing you arrived in, and your protective gear is, well, your skin, apparently. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that the earliest major push for what we now recognize as the Great Wall, particularly the sections built from scratch rather than just connected, largely began during the Qin dynasty under Emperor Qin Shi Huang. This isn't a leisurely stroll through a historical park. This is raw, brutal, and incredibly inefficient labor on a scale almost impossible to fathom. You're elbowed by the man next to you, a gaunt, older fellow whose eyes hold a vacant despair that chills you more than the morning air. He gestures with his chin towards a pile of massive, roughly hewn stones. "Pick one up," he croaks, his voice raspy, like gravel in a blender. "Carry it to the foreman." Your modern muscles, accustomed to, well, mostly operating a remote control and lifting a coffee cup, protest immediately. These aren't decorative garden pebbles. These are chunks of granite that seem to weigh as much as a small car. You bend, groan, and strain, trying to get a grip on one of the smaller ones, probably still a good 80 to 100 pounds. It's awkward, rough, and sharp-edged. You can practically hear your chiropractor weeping in the future. As you finally manage to hoist it onto your shoulder, gritting your teeth, you immediately notice the foreman isn't just looking for you to move a stone. He wants it moved to that specific spot on the emerging wall section, roughly 100 yards away, uphill. This isn't just about brawn. It's about navigating treacherous, uneven terrain with a load that threatens to send you tumbling at any moment. You realize, with a sickening lurch in your stomach, that this isn't a one-off task. This is the first of hundreds, maybe thousands, you'll be expected to perform before the sun even reaches its zenith. And then you'll do it again, and again. You stumble forward, breath rasping in your throat, trying desperately not to trip over the loose rocks or, worse, the unmoving bodies of those who couldn't keep up yesterday. There's no designated path, no clear lane. It's just a chaotic ballet of straining bodies, grunts, and the rhythmic thud of stone being dropped into place. A surprising, almost quirky, tidbit about the Great Wall is that some sections, particularly those built during the Ming Dynasty, used a mortar made from a mixture of slaked lime and sticky rice, which provided incredible strength and durability. So your sweat and tears are literally going into something that might outlast millennia, fueled by a carbohydrate that sounds more like your favorite takeout. Though you won't be eating any sticky rice unless it's a moldy, forgotten grain in the bottom of a communal bowl. As you near the designated spot, a shout slices through the din faster. You think the Huns wait for your tea break. The foreman, a man whose face is as stony as the materials you're carrying, cracks his whip near your feet, sending dust and small pebbles scattering. You flinch, nearly dropping your precious cargo, and redouble your efforts, muscles screaming in protest. This immediate, unforgiving pressure, the total disregard for your physical well-being, is a shock to your modern sensibilities. There's no pace yourself, no take a 5-minute break. Your pace is dictated by the foreman's impatience and the ever-present threat of punishment. Historians still argue whether the wall's primary purpose was solely military defense or also a massive project to consolidate power and control labor. But from your perspective, it feels like an incredibly effective way to both. Your first few minutes on the wall have already introduced you to raw, unyielding physical demand, the constant threat of violence, and the crushing realization that your life now holds less value than the stones you carry. Welcome to your first day, if you can even call it that. It's barely dawn, and you're already questioning if you'll see nightfall. Your initial shock at the wall's colossal scale slowly gives way to a deeper, more chilling realization. This brutal landscape, this backbreaking labor, it's not just a change of scenery. It's the culmination of an ordeal that began long before you ever laid eyes on those stacked stones. See, you weren't airlifted here on a comfy charter plane. You were marched, and that forced march, my friend, was an epic of suffering all its own. A gauntlet that thinned the ranks before the first pickaxe even hit dirt. One unremarkable morning, a stern-faced official, flanked by armed guards, arrived in your small village. There was no negotiation, no appeal, just a simple decree read from a rolled scroll. By imperial command, you are conscripted for labor on the Grand Wall. Your name, along with dozens of others, was called. One moment you were mending a fishing net or tilling a field. The next you were just another body in a rapidly swelling column, your life as you knew it irrevocably severed. You had perhaps a few minutes to gather what little you could, a spare tunic, a worn blanket, maybe a handful of dried millet if you were lucky, before being prodded onto the road. No emotional goodbyes, no tearful embraces, just the cold, hard shove of a spear butt. It was less like a recruitment drive and more like a human cattle drive, only with less concern for the cattle. The journey began immediately, stretching for weeks, sometimes months, depending on how far your home province lay from the ever-expanding frontier of construction. You weren't just walking, you were marching, from dawn till dusk, across every conceivable type of terrain China could throw at you. Imagine trudging through the parched, dusty plains, the sun beating down with an intensity that promised sunstroke, your throat feeling like sandpaper. Then, suddenly, the landscape shifts, and you're scrambling up steep, rocky mountain passes, each step a precarious gamble, your makeshift sandals disintegrating beneath your feet. You ford icy rivers, the current threatening to sweep you away, the cold seeping into your bones. There's no paved road, no rest stops with climate control, just endless, unforgiving ground. Your feet quickly become a roadmap of blisters, open sores, and infections that throb with every agonizing step. You'd probably be asking for a taxi by the 3rd kilometer, let alone the 3rd week. Your Fitbit, if it existed, would have simply exploded from existential dread. Food was a constant, gnawing hunger. Rations, when they were distributed, were meager. A handful of coarse grain, maybe a piece of dried, questionable meat if you were exceptionally fortunate. Often, there was nothing, and you were expected to forage or starve. The water was equally scarce and frequently contaminated, leading to outbreaks of dysentery that swept through the ranks like wildfire. You'd hear the desperate retching in the night, the mournful cries of those too weak to continue. There was no medical attention. If you fell ill, if you couldn't keep up, you were simply left behind. Your fellow conscripts, hardened by their own suffering, would glance back for a moment, a fleeting flicker of empathy, before averting their eyes and shuffling onward, knowing that to linger was to share the same fate. It's a stark reminder that a mainstream historical fact about the construction of the wall is that it claimed countless lives, with many dying not from direct labor, but from the brutal journey to the construction sites, disease, and starvation. Sanitation was non-existent. You slept in overcrowded, makeshift camps by the side of the road, or simply dropped where you stood, spooning with strangers for warmth in the cold nights, or just trying to carve out a sliver of personal space amidst the teeming masses. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, human waste, and sickness. One particularly quirky tidbit that illustrates the desperation. Some historical accounts suggest that conscripts would occasionally resort to eating grass or even the leather from their own sandals, boiled to a pulp, just to put something in their stomachs. I mean, talk about being on a restrictive diet. It really puts that juice cleanse you tried into perspective, doesn't it? The constant marching, the hunger, the lack of sleep, and the omnipresent threat of disease wore away at you. Not just physically, but mentally. Your sense of self, your individual identity began to erode. You were no longer John or Jane from some village. You were just a number, a pair of hands, another cog in the vast, grinding imperial machine. The overseers, usually stern, often brutal, would bark orders, lash out at stragglers, and enforce a relentless pace. There was no room for individual weakness, no allowance for exhaustion. You learned to move, even when every fiber of your being screamed for rest, because the alternative was a harsh, swift lesson in imperial discipline, often administered with a bamboo stick or worse. You'd witness people collapse, their faces ashen, their bodies racked with fever. Sometimes they'd be given a quick kick to see if they'd stir. More often than not, they wouldn't, and the column would simply flow around them, leaving them to the elements. You learned to ignore the sight, to compartmentalize the horror, because looking too long meant acknowledging your own terrifying vulnerability. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates were primarily due to deliberate neglect or simply the unavoidable consequence of such a massive undertaking with limited resources and ancient medical knowledge. Either way, for you, it feels like an intentional culling. You would try to cling to fleeting memories of home, the scent of your mother's cooking, the sound of your village stream, but even those comforts began to feel distant, unreal, replaced by the grim, present reality of dust, aching muscles, and the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of thousands of marching feet. By the time you finally reached the construction site, a shadow of your former self, you were already broken, a mere shell, ready to be poured into the concrete, or rather, the compacted earth and stone. And that, my friends, was just the warm-up act. So, you've somehow survived the forced march, a feat in itself that would earn you a lifetime supply of participation trophies in any modern context. Your body is a symphony of aches and pains, your mind a foggy echo chamber of hunger and exhaustion. But as you stumble onto the construction site, the real work begins, and it's a whole new level of hell. What probably isn't immediately obvious from the glossy postcards of the Great Wall is that it wasn't just built on convenient, flat land. Oh no, This monumental barrier winds its way across some of the most unforgiving, diverse, and downright brutal terrain imaginable. And guess who gets to tame it? That's right, you. You find yourself staring at a landscape that looks less like a construction site and more like a geological nightmare. Towering, jagged mountains pierce the sky, their slopes steep and treacherous. Vast, desolate deserts stretch to the horizon, offering no shade, no respite from the sun's scorching glare. Then there are the deep, winding valleys, riddled with hidden ravines and swift-flowing rivers. Every single section of the wall, from its foundations to its battlements, had to be adapted to the specific challenges of that local environment. This meant that before a single brick could be laid, the very earth itself had to be conquered, reshaped, or bypassed. You might be assigned to a mountain section, tasked with scaling sheer rock faces, carrying immense loads, with the constant threat of a slip sending you plummeting to your death. Or perhaps you're in a desert area, where the biggest enemy isn't a steep incline, but the shifting sands that threaten to bury your work, and you along with it, or the sudden, violent sandstorms that reduce visibility to zero and strip your skin raw. Honestly, it makes building a sandcastle in your backyard seem like rocket science by comparison. The core of your daily existence now revolves around quarry work. This isn't a precision operation with fancy machinery. This is you, a crude pickaxe, and a very large, very stubborn piece of rock. Your job is to extract the raw materials needed for the wall, massive stones, granite, limestone, from their ancient resting places. You'd be assigned to a rock face, often precariously positioned, with the task of chipping away at the stone, bit by agonizing bit. Imagine swinging that heavy, blunt pickaxe, hour after hour, the jarring impact reverberating through your arms, shoulders, and spine. You're not just breaking rocks, you're breaking your body, slowly but surely. The dust, thick and suffocating, fills your lungs with every breath, turning your sputum black by the end of the day. Mainstream historical fact: the sheer volume of material required for the Great Wall is staggering. Estimates suggest billions of bricks and millions of cubic meters of earth and stone were moved by hand, a testament to the immense human labor involved. You'd be working alongside hundreds, perhaps thousands, of other conscripts, the air thick with the sound of picks striking stone, the grunts of exertion, and the occasional chilling scream as a rock shifted or a section of earth collapsed, crushing those below. There are no safety nets, no hard hats, no spotters. If a rock falls, you either get out of the way or you become part of the foundation. Your life literally hangs by a thread, often quite literally, as you might be lowering yourself down a cliff face on a fraying rope to access a particular vein of stone. One particularly quirky tidbit about these quarry sites is the ingenious, albeit primitive, methods used to split larger rocks. Instead of explosives, they would often drill rows of holes into the stone, then insert wooden wedges. These wedges would be soaked with water, causing them to expand and slowly, laboriously, split the rock along the lines of the holes. So, you're not just swinging a pickaxe, you're also essentially a human drill, creating those holes, then hauling water to soak the wedges, hoping for a clean break. It's a process that requires patience, precision, and an almost superhuman tolerance for repetitive, back-breaking labor. I bet your arm would be more swollen than a politician's ego after just 1 hour of that. The danger isn't just from falling rocks or collapsing earth. It's the inherent instability of the terrain itself. You might be working on a slope, carving out a level foundation, when a sudden downpour turns the ground into a treacherous mudslide. Or a strong gust of wind on a mountain peak could send you reeling, your heavy load acting like a sail, pulling you over the edge. There's a constant, low thrum of anxiety that buzzes in the back of your mind, a primordial fear of the earth beneath your feet giving way. Historians still argue whether the wall's exact route was always strategically sound or if some sections were chosen simply because the terrain presented a less impossible challenge for construction. From your vantage point, every inch of this terrain feels impossible. You become intimately familiar with the texture of dirt, the smell of damp rock, the biting cold of stone against your skin. Your hands, once soft and perhaps accustomed to a pen or keyboard, are now permanently calloused, cracked, and bleeding. Splinters are a constant companion, infections a frequent visitor. You learn to brace yourself for the inevitable slivers of rock that fly up into your face as you chip away, hoping they don't find your eye. Your back, perpetually aching, develops a permanent stoop. Your legs, once capable of a leisurely stroll, now burn with a constant, deep fatigue that no amount of rest seems to alleviate. Each stone you quarry, each spadeful of earth you move, feels like a piece of your soul being chipped away, added to the ever-growing monument of your own suffering. And yet, the foreman's whip is a constant reminder. The work must go on. So, you're now a seasoned veteran of the quarry, intimately acquainted with the raw, unyielding nature of stone. Your muscles are screaming, your lungs are coated in dust, and your hands are a testament to grit and gristle. But breaking the stone is only half the battle. The other, equally devastating half, involves turning those raw materials into a defensive structure using tools that would make a modern carpenter weep. You're not operating pneumatic drills or laser levels. You're working with rudimentary, often worn-out, instruments that demand every ounce of your physical strength and more. Your primary companions are likely the pickaxe, which you've probably nicknamed Agony by now, and a variety of hammers. These aren't the balanced, ergonomic hammers you might find in a hardware store. These are heavy, unwieldy chunks of metal or stone, often with ill-fitting wooden handles that splinter and dig into your palms. You're using them to shape the rough-hewn stones, to chip away the excess, to make them fit together with a precision that's almost unbelievable given the lack of sophisticated equipment. Imagine trying to assemble a complex Lego set, but each brick weighs 50 pounds, is irregularly shaped, and you're only allowed to use a rock to bash it into place. And no instructions. Then there's the basket. Oh, the humble basket. This seemingly innocuous item is perhaps the most insidious tool of all. It's woven from reeds or bamboo, sometimes reinforced with strips of hide, and it's your primary means of transportation for materials. Whether it's earth, smaller stones, or the components for mortar, it all goes into the basket. And then it goes on your back or balanced precariously on your head. You might carry it by hand, but that's only for short distances because the weight is monumental. You become part of a human conveyor belt, a seemingly endless line of stooped figures, trudging uphill, downhill, across treacherous paths, each burdened by a load that feels designed to snap your spine. Your shoulders are permanently bruised, your neck perpetually stiff, and your spine creaks with every step. I mean, your average supermarket trolley has better suspension. Mainstream historical fact: while large-scale machinery like cranes, even primitive ones, might have been used for the heaviest sections, the vast majority of material movement on the Great Wall was done by human labor, supplemented by rudimentary carts and wheelbarrows where the terrain allowed. This means that every single brick, every single stone, every single bucket of mortar was lifted, carried, and placed by hand. Imagine the sheer, unimaginable volume of individual lifts. Your entire day is a repetitive cycle of bending, lifting, carrying, and placing, each motion a strain on your already exhausted body. Despite the primitive tools, the ancient Chinese engineers and laborers developed surprisingly effective construction methods. You'd be taught, often with a shout and a shove, how to compact earth using large, heavy ramming tools, literally stomping or pounding the ground to create a solid foundation for the wall. This rammed earth technique created incredibly durable sections, but it was physically brutal, requiring sustained, rhythmic exertion. You'd be part of a team, all pounding in unison, the ground vibrating beneath your feet, the dust rising in choking clouds. Then there's the process of lifting massive stones. Forget forklifts. You'd be using levers, long, heavy wooden poles, and ropes, often made from hemp or animal hide. This requires perfect coordination with your fellow laborers. One wrong move, one misplaced foot, and the enormous stone could shift, crushing a limb or worse, taking someone's life. It's a dance of brute force and careful calculation, performed under immense pressure. It truly makes your last flat-pack furniture assembly project seem like a breeze, doesn't it? At least IKEA provides an Allen key, a particularly quirky tidbit about these tools and methods. Some historians suggest that early forms of the Chinese wheelbarrow, which uniquely placed the wheel centrally under the load, significantly eased the burden of transport on flatter sections. This design allowed a single person to move heavier loads than a two-wheeled cart, effectively optimizing the use of individual labor. So, if you were lucky enough to be on a section where the terrain allowed, you might have had the questionable luxury of pushing a heavy wheelbarrow instead of carrying everything on your back. It's still backbreaking, mind you, but at least your spine is only slightly compressed instead of completely pulverized. You learn quickly that precision is paramount, even with such crude implements. A stone placed incorrectly could weaken an entire section. A poorly mixed batch of mortar could lead to cracks. You'd be instructed on how to select the right stone for a specific spot, how to trim it just so, how to layer the mortar, how to ensure the wall's outer facing was straight and true. There's no room for sloppiness. Historians still argue whether the consistent quality across vast stretches of the wall speaks more to centralized, top-down engineering genius or the inherent skill and ingenuity of the individual laborers adapting on site. For you, it's simply a matter of survival. Mistakes are not tolerated, and the foreman's watchful eye, coupled with his ever-ready whip, ensures that you pay close attention to every detail, even when your body is screaming for a moment's respite. Your hands, perpetually aching, bleed into the mortar, adding another, unseen, ingredient to the wall's enduring strength. You're not just building a wall, you're literally becoming part of it, one painful, bone-weary swing at a time. You've survived the quarry work, wrestled with the primitive tools, and your body now feels less like a finely tuned machine and more like a bag of loose parts held together by sheer stubbornness. But even if you manage to avoid a rockfall or a misplaced swing of a hammer, there's a slower, more insidious enemy always at your heels: hunger and thirst. In your modern life, a rumbling stomach means a quick trip to the fridge or a takeout order. On the Great Wall, it means a gnawing, constant ache that defines your very existence. Your daily rations, if you can even call them that, are a cruel joke played by the imperial bureaucracy. You might receive a small handful of coarse millet or unhulled rice, often moldy, perhaps a few withered vegetables if you're lucky, and on truly rare occasions, a sliver of dried meat that looks suspiciously like shoe leather. This isn't a balanced diet, it's barely sustenance. The caloric intake is woefully inadequate for the superhuman effort you're expending daily. Imagine doing intense manual labor for 12 to 14 hours a day on a diet that barely covers your basal metabolic rate, let alone the energy needed to lift hundreds of pounds of stone. Your body constantly feels like it's running on fumes, like a car with an empty fuel tank but still being forced to drive uphill. You'd be experiencing perpetual dizziness, muscle cramps, and a foggy, lethargic mind that struggles to focus. Hunger isn't just an inconvenience. It's a constant companion, a dull ache that sharpens to a burning pain, eroding your strength and your will. It definitely puts those intermittent fasting trends into a rather grim historical context, doesn't it? Mainstream historical fact: food supply lines to the remote Great Wall construction sites were notoriously difficult to maintain. leading to widespread malnutrition and starvation among the laborers. The sheer logistics of feeding hundreds of thousands of workers across thousands of miles of rugged terrain were immense, and often the system simply failed, or the supplies were diverted or plundered before reaching the intended recipients. So your hunger isn't just bad luck, it's a systemic failure. And then there's water. Oh, water, the most precious commodity of all. Unlike food, which you might be able to ration or supplement with a lucky find, water is non-negotiable. You're working under a brutal sun, sweating profusely, expending enormous amounts of energy, and your body is constantly dehydrating. Water sources near the construction sites were often scarce, contaminated, or both. You might get a small, communal scoop of murky water, shared among dozens of thirsty men, teeming with who knows what microorganisms. This leads to rampant waterborne diseases, dysentery, cholera, that sweep through the camps with devastating speed, turning healthy men into withered husks in a matter of days. You'd witness men collapsing not just from exhaustion, but from the unbearable cramps and relentless vomiting of acute dehydration. One quirky tidbit that highlights the scarcity. Some accounts suggest that in particularly arid regions, workers would resort to collecting dew-off leaves in the mornings, or even chewing on certain desert plants just to extract a few precious drops of moisture. Others might try to dig shallow wells, hoping to find a hidden underground spring, a desperate gamble that often yielded nothing but dry earth and broken hopes. The taste of a truly clean, refreshing drink of water would become a distant, almost mythical memory. Your mouth would be perpetually dry, your lips cracked and bleeding, and your head a constant drumbeat of thirst-induced pain. The scarcity of food and water breeds fierce competition and an erosion of basic human decency. There's no camaraderie over meals. It's a desperate scramble. You learn to guard your meager portion, to eat quickly, to not make eye contact. If you're caught stealing food, the punishment is swift and brutal, often worse than any hunger pangs. You also learn to become acutely aware of your body's signals, not in a mindful wellness way, but in a survivalist way. Is that dizziness from fatigue or severe dehydration? Is that stomach cramp just hunger, or the first sign of a deadly fever? Historians still argue whether the Chinese authorities intentionally kept the laborers on starvation rations to weaken them and prevent rebellion, or if it was simply an unavoidable consequence of the logistical challenges and the sheer size of the workforce. From your perspective, it feels like a deliberate torment, designed to strip you of all will, leaving you just strong enough to lift the next stone, but too weak to dream of escape. The constant state of malnutrition and dehydration makes you incredibly susceptible to illness and injury. Your body, deprived of essential nutrients, can't heal properly. A small cut becomes a festering infection. A fever becomes a death sentence. Every scrape, every fall, every raw blister on your feet holds the potential for fatal consequences. You become accustomed to the gaunt faces, the hollow eyes, the protruding bones of your fellow laborers. Their bodies, like yours, are slowly being consumed from within. You're not just building a wall. You're shrinking, withering day by excruciating day. And all the while, the foreman's voice cuts through your hunger-induced haze, demanding more, always more. Your stomach growls a silent protest, a constant reminder that you are literally wasting away, one agonizing, thirsty, empty-bellied moment at a time. So you're famished, parched, and your body feels like a collection of broken twigs. As the sun dips below the rugged horizon, painting the sky in fleeting streaks of orange and purple, you might entertain a brief, desperate flicker of hope for rest. But that hope is quickly extinguished when you survey your shelter for the night. This isn't a quaint little cabin or even a sturdy tent. This is a crude, makeshift camp, flung together with whatever scraps of material were available, offering minimal protection from the elements and absolutely no comfort. Your living conditions are, to put it mildly, abysmal. Imagine a vast, sprawling collection of rough lean-tos, hastily dug pits covered with branches and mud, or perhaps, if you're lucky, a shared communal dugout carved into a hillside. These aren't permanent structures. They're temporary waypoints, built and abandoned as the wall's construction moved forward. There's no privacy, no personal space. You're crammed in with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of other laborers, shoulder to shoulder, in a stifling, claustrophobic environment. The air inside is thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, damp earth, and the pervasive odor of human waste from the nearby, open latrines. It's a smell that clings to your clothes, your skin, and seems to permeate your very soul. You'd probably prefer sleeping in a dumpster behind a particularly pungent fish market, honestly. At least there you might find a forgotten snack. Mainstream historical fact. The living conditions for the vast majority of Great Wall laborers were incredibly harsh, with basic necessities like clean water, sanitation, and adequate shelter often overlooked or simply impossible to provide on such a massive, moving construction project. There were no designated dormitories or prefabricated housing units. Each day brought a struggle for a safe, dry patch of ground to rest your weary bones. The shelter itself offers little respite. If it rains, the roof, likely made of interwoven branches and mud, will leak, turning the packed earth floor into a muddy, miserable swamp. If it's windy, the gusts will whistle through the gaps, chilling you to the bone. In winter, the cold seeps in, making sleep almost impossible as you shiver uncontrollably. In summer, the enclosed spaces become sweltering ovens, attracting swarms of flies and mosquitoes, whose incessant buzzing and biting add another layer of torment to your existence. You're always either too hot, too cold, or soaking wet. Sanitation is a concept that simply doesn't exist. There are no facilities for washing, no clean water for bathing. You're covered in dirt, sweat, and grime from the moment you wake up to the moment you collapse. This lack of hygiene is a breeding ground for disease. Lice and fleas are constant companions, their bites adding to your skin's already irritated state. Open sores from injuries or insect bites quickly become infected. And then there are the rats, bold and numerous, scurrying through the camp in search of any dropped scrap of food, often sharing your cramped sleeping space. They're probably more well-fed than you are, which is a truly depressing thought. One quirky tidbit. Some historical accounts suggest that, in an attempt to provide some form of insulation during the harsh winters, workers would sometimes mix straw and even animal dung into the mud used for their crude shelters. While it might have offered a minuscule improvement in warmth, imagine the smell. You'd literally be sleeping in a hovel made of, well, let's just say, organic materials. It makes your last camping trip in a state-of-the-art tent seem like a five-star hotel stay, doesn't it? Sleep, when it comes, is fitful and shallow. The collective snores, coughs, and restless movements of dozens of other bodies in close proximity, combined with the constant itching of lice and the gnawing hunger in your stomach, make deep rest a rare luxury. You might find yourself drifting into a half-sleep, only to be startled awake by a loud snore, a sudden chill, or the distant cries of a new arrival being brutalized by the overseers. Your dreams, if you have them, are likely nightmares of endless labor or the terrifying image of your family, now impossibly far away. The lack of proper rest means you wake up feeling as exhausted, if not more so, than when you collapsed the night before. Your body never fully recovers. This chronic sleep deprivation exacerbates your physical and mental fatigue, making you more prone to accidents, less able to think clearly, and increasingly susceptible to illness. Historians still argue whether the extreme living conditions were a deliberate strategy to break the workers' spirits, or simply a pragmatic consequence of the scale and remote nature of the project. For you, lying in the damp, crowded darkness, shivering despite the closeness of other bodies, it feels like nothing less than torture. Every sunrise brings not a fresh start, but a grim, renewed dread of another day of unending toil. And as the meager campfires flicker and die, plunging the camp into near total darkness, you're left with only the sound of your own ragged breath and the desperate hope that tomorrow, somehow, won't be worse. You're perpetually exhausted, constantly hungry, and now, thanks to your charming accommodations, probably covered in bug bites and mud, just when you think you've experienced the full spectrum of misery, the weather decides to chime in, reminding you that Mother Nature, much like your overseers, has no mercy. Building the Great Wall was an all-seasons affair, meaning you weren't just battling the terrain and the imperial deadlines. You were battling the planet itself. And trust me, the planet was winning. Imagine the height of summer in northern China. The sun beats down with a relentless, scorching intensity that feels like a physical weight pressing down on you. There's no shade, no respite. The air shimmers with heat, and the stones you're quarrying or carrying become so hot they burn your skin through your threadbare clothing. You're sweating rivers, and remember your water situation? Non-existent. Dehydration becomes a rapid, lethal threat. Your head pounds, your vision blurs, and the world starts to tilt. Heat stroke is a very real, very common killer. You'd see men collapse, their faces pale and slick with sweat, only to convulse and die within minutes, their bodies literally cooking from the inside out. There's no EMT on standby, no cool towels, no for drips. You simply become another obstacle to be stepped over. It makes your most annoying summer power outage feel like a delightful glamping trip. Mainstream historical fact: extreme weather conditions, including intense summer heat and brutal winter cold, were significant contributors to the high mortality rates among Great Wall laborers. The lack of adequate clothing, shelter, and hydration made these environmental factors particularly lethal. You're essentially working in an oven or a freezer, depending on the season, with no way to regulate your body temperature. Just when you've adjusted to the idea of constantly feeling like a roasted chicken, the seasons shift. And with the autumn comes the biting winds, picking up dust and grit, turning your skin raw. Then the real fun begins: winter. Oh, the Chinese winter. This isn't just a bit of a chill in the air. This is Arctic-level cold, particularly in the northern reaches where much of the wall was built. Temperatures plummet far below freezing. The ground becomes iron-hard, making quarrying even more agonizingly difficult. Your breath freezes in the air, your fingers and toes quickly go numb, and the cold seeps into your very bones, a deep, pervasive ache that never leaves. Your clothing is probably still the threadbare rags you arrived in, offering no protection against the biting winds and relentless snow. Frostbite is a certainty. Your exposed skin turns waxy and numb, then black, and then falls off. Many laborers would lose fingers, toes, or even entire limbs to the cold, turning them into disabled burdens who were quickly discarded. Imagine trying to manipulate heavy stones with fingers so frozen they feel like clumsy clubs, or walking over icy, uneven ground with feet that have no feeling left in them. Hypothermia is a constant, creeping threat. You might just drift off to sleep, too cold to shiver anymore, and simply never wake up. It's a silent, insidious killer. One quirky tidbit: some historical records suggest that in certain particularly cold regions, the frozen ground itself was used as a construction material, with blocks of ice and snow being incorporated into temporary foundations or even as part of the wall's core, especially in winter. This would then be reinforced with rock and earth once the thaw came. So, you might literally be building a wall of ice, all while your teeth are chattering so hard they might chip. Talk about a chilly workday. It makes building a snowman in your backyard seem like a balmy activity, doesn't it? Then there are the less common but equally devastating weather events. Flash floods in the valleys, turning the ground to dangerous mudslides and washing away completed sections of the wall. Sudden, violent thunderstorms on the mountaintops, sending lightning bolts dangerously close to your exposed position. The wind, ever present, can whip into gales, threatening to send you, or the heavy stones you're carrying, tumbling down a precipice. There's no warning system, no weather app, no way to prepare. You're simply at the mercy of the elements, a tiny, vulnerable speck against the vast, indifferent power of nature. Historians still argue whether the engineers adequately accounted for these extreme weather shifts in their designs, or if the sheer pressure to complete the wall meant corners were cut, leading to sections being repeatedly damaged and rebuilt. From your cold, shivering, or sweat-drenched perspective, it certainly feels like no one thought about the poor souls who had to actually live through these conditions. Every day is a test of endurance against an invisible, all-encompassing enemy. You're not just building a wall to keep out invaders, you're building it against the very forces of nature, and often nature wins, taking you with it. You cling to the fleeting warmth of a meager fire at night, or the brief relief of a cloud passing over the scorching sun, knowing that the respite is temporary and the battle against the elements will resume with the dawn. Your body, already a monument to pain, endures yet another layer of torment, confirming that you wouldn't last a day. So, you've somehow weathered the extreme temperatures, your body now feeling like a desiccated prune in summer or a human ice cube in winter. But the elements aren't the only forces actively trying to dismantle your already fragile existence. The work itself, the tools, the sheer physical strain, all conspire to inflict injuries, and the unsanitary conditions ensure that even a minor cut can become a death sentence. There's no urgent care clinic here, no sympathetic nurse, no, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. Imagine this. You're hauling a massive stone, slippery with sweat, up a steep incline. Your makeshift sandals offer no grip. You misstep, your foot slides, and the full weight of the stone comes crashing down on your leg. The pain is instantaneous, blinding. You scream, a guttural sound that's quickly lost in the cacophony of the work site. Your leg is twisted at an unnatural angle, the bone visibly protruding through your torn skin. In a modern context, this is an emergency. You'd be rushed to a hospital, sedated, operated on, and spend months in recovery. Here, you're just another casualty. An overseer might glance over, perhaps offer a perfunctory kick. If you can still move, you're expected to crawl to the side. If you can't, you're either left where you fall or dragged to the edge of the camp, out of the way. There's no splint, no painkiller, no antiseptic. Your only treatment is the cold, hard ground, and the faint hope that infection doesn't set in. A hope that is almost always utterly, cruelly dashed. Mainstream historical fact. Injuries were endemic among Great Wall laborers, ranging from crushed limbs and broken bones to severe cuts and spinal damage, largely due to the heavy lifting, dangerous terrain, and rudimentary tools. With no proper medical care, even minor injuries frequently led to infection, gangrene, and death. Your modern workplace safety standards, with their zero-harm policies, would be considered hilarious science fiction by these guys. And it's not just dramatic, bone-breaking accidents. It's the cumulative toll of endless small injuries. The constant scrapes and cuts from rough stones, the deep splinters from worn tools, the blisters and open sores on your feet from walking miles in inadequate footwear. Every single one of these becomes a portal for infection. Without soap or clean water, bacteria thrive. You develop festering wounds, red and swollen, oozing pus, often accompanied by a raging fever. The pain would be constant, dulling your senses, stealing your strength. Gangrene, with its telltale blackening of the flesh and putrid odor, was a frequent, horrifying outcome, usually leading to an agonizing, slow death. Then there are the diseases, which spread like wildfire through the overcrowded, unsanitary camps. Dysentery, as mentioned, turns your insides to water, dehydrating you rapidly. Cholera is even worse, a swift, brutal killer. Typhus, spread by lice, brings delirium, high fever, and often death. Pneumonia, especially in winter, takes hold in weakened lungs. There's no understanding of germ theory, no antibiotics, no vaccines. If you get sick, your body is on its own. You'd witness men convulsing with fevers, their eyes glazed over, their bodies wasting away before your very eyes. You'd hear the ragged, desperate coughs that echoed through the camp at night, each one a reminder that your turn might be next. A particularly quirky tidbit: some ancient Chinese medical texts did describe various herbal remedies for fevers, wounds, and stomach ailments, but these were typically for the wealthy and elite, not for conscripted laborers on the frontier. So, while a highly skilled imperial physician might be brewing some complex concoction for a nobleman, you're just hoping that dirty puddle water won't kill you faster than the actual construction. You'd probably kill for a modern ibuprofen, let alone a course of antibiotics. The psychological toll of constantly witnessing death and suffering is immense. You see your fellow laborers, perhaps even friends you made on the agonizing march, succumb to illness or injury. You learn to steel yourself to avert your gaze, because showing too much empathy is a luxury you can't afford. It drains your own will to live, replacing it with a grim resignation. Historians still argue whether the high mortality was simply an accepted cost of empire building, or if the sheer inhumanity of the conditions reflected a deliberate policy of disposable labor. For you, lying in your crude shelter, shivering with fever or throbbing with pain, it feels like you're already dead, just waiting for your body to catch up. You try to move a stiff limb, but the pain is too sharp. You cough and the phlegm tastes like dust and blood. Your head spins, with a chilling certainty that this is the beginning of the end for many, and it could easily be the end for you. Your body, once a source of strength, has become a fragile, failing vessel, constantly under attack from within and without, proving that your modern resilience wouldn't last a single day. You're not just building a wall. You're building your own tomb, brick by painful, infected brick. You're sick, injured, and absolutely shattered, a walking testament to imperial indifference. But your suffering isn't just a consequence of the harsh environment or the primitive conditions. It's actively maintained and enforced by a system designed to extract every last ounce of labor from you. Welcome to the brutal reality of the overseers and the relentless discipline that ensures you keep working, no matter the cost. Forget your HR department, your grievance procedures, or even the faint concept of workers' rights. Here, your foreman is judge, jury, and executioner, often literally. These men, usually hardened veterans or former soldiers, were tasked with one singular objective: to ensure maximum output. Their authority was absolute, their methods often barbaric. They weren't there to motivate with encouraging words or performance bonuses. They were there to intimidate, to punish, and to break any spirit of defiance. Your manager at your last job, who sent too many emails after hours, suddenly seems like a saint, doesn't he? The primary tool of motivation, beyond starvation and exhaustion, was the whip or a heavy bamboo stick. Any perceived slackness, any moment of rest not explicitly sanctioned, any hesitation, any mistake, or no matter how small or unintentional, would be met with immediate, brutal physical punishment. Imagine swinging your pickaxe, your vision blurring from hunger, and your aim wavers. A sudden, searing pain across your back or legs as the whip cracks. You flinch, perhaps drop your tool, and the blows continue, punctuated by sharp, guttural shouts. You learn to ignore the pain, to push through it, because stopping only prolongs the agony. Your body quickly becomes a roadmap of welts, bruises, and open cuts, fresh ones appearing daily. Mainstream historical fact: physical punishment, including flogging, beating, and even execution, was a common disciplinary measure used against laborers on the Great Wall, reflecting the harsh authoritarian nature of the imperial administration and the disposable view of human life. This wasn't just a rare occurrence. It was a daily reality for thousands. But it wasn't just individual acts of violence. There was a system of collective punishment too. If a section of the wall wasn't completed on time, or if a significant amount of material was deemed wasted, entire work groups might be penalized. This could mean reduced rations for everyone, extra hours of labor, or even public beatings of randomly selected individuals to encourage the others. This fosters an atmosphere of fear and suspicion, where individual suffering is amplified by the constant threat of collective retribution. You learn to resent not just the overseers, but also your fellow laborers, knowing that their mistakes could lead to your own pain. One particularly quirky tidbit: some historical accounts mention that certain overseers would employ a form of psychological torture, promising a small extra ration or a brief respite to the most diligent workers, only to snatch it away at the last moment or distribute it to someone else, crushing any flicker of hope and reinforcing the futility of effort. So, it's not just physical abuse. It's a calculated breakdown of your mental fortitude, a subtle way to show you that even your best efforts mean nothing. Talk about a toxic workplace culture. The overseers weren't just brutal, they were omnipresent. Their eyes were everywhere, constantly scanning the endless lines of laborers, looking for any sign of weakness or dissent. You couldn't hide, you couldn't slack off, you couldn't escape their gaze. This constant surveillance, combined with the exhaustion and the fear, created a sense of perpetual dread. You learned to keep your head down, to move mechanically, to erase any sign of individual thought or emotion from your face. To show pain was to invite more. To show defiance was to invite death. Historians still argue whether the harshness of the discipline was truly necessary to complete such an immense project, given the technology of the time, or if it was an expression of tyrannical power. For you, it's irrelevant. All you know is the burning sting of the whip, the constant ache in your joints, and the never-ending stream of demands. You're forced to work even when you're sick, even when you're injured, because the alternative is worse. Many would try to hide their illnesses, to push through their injuries, until their bodies simply gave out, often collapsing mid-swing, only to be met with a final, furious blow from an overseer before being discarded. Your only relief is the brief, fleeting moment of darkness when you collapse in your crude shelter, knowing that the overseers, for a few hours at least, will be out of sight. But even then, their presence looms in your mind, a constant reminder that your life is not your own. You are a tool, a resource, to be used and discarded when broken, all under the watchful, merciless eye of your imperial masters. The whip cracks in your memory, a cruel lullaby, cementing the grim certainty that you wouldn't last a day. Your body is a testament to the harsh discipline, covered in bruises and raw from constant effort. You're just a cog in the machine, endlessly moving earth and stone. But here's the kicker. The materials you're using, the food you're not eating, even the crude tools in your battered hands, they don't magically appear on sight. Every single piece of this colossal puzzle had to be transported, often over vast distances and through treacherous terrain, from its point of origin to your remote construction zone. This logistical nightmare was a gargantuan undertaking in itself, a constant struggle against geography, time, and human limitations. And you're sometimes part of that moving supply chain too. Imagine trying to supply a modern army across an entire continent with no paved roads, No trains, no trucks, no airplanes. Now multiply that by 10, and instead of bullets and MREs, it's millions of tons of rock, timber, lime, and food. Mainstream historical fact. The logistical challenges of supplying the Great Wall construction were immense, leading to massive inefficiencies, spoilage, and significant loss of life among those tasked with transport. Grain, bricks, tools, and even water had to be moved, often over hundreds of miles, through deserts, over mountains, and across rivers. Your boss complaining about a delayed delivery from Amazon probably doesn't quite grasp the historical context. Consider the bricks. While much of the wall was built with rammed earth and stone, bricks became increasingly common, particularly during the Ming Dynasty, for their durability and ease of construction. These bricks weren't manufactured on site. They were often fired in kilns in distant locations, then loaded onto carts, boats, or more often than not, the backs of human laborers or animals. Picture a single brick. Now imagine 1,000 bricks. Now 1,000,000. Each one had to be hauled manually to its destination. The paths were not roads. They were often just animal trails or newly hacked out tracks, slippery in the rain, dusty in the sun, and treacherous at all times. You might find yourself temporarily reassigned from wall construction to supply duty. This means joining a convoy, probably of human porters, each straining under a massive load. You could be carrying bundles of timber, essential for scaffolding or tools, or sacks of rice, knowing full well that much of it will spoil or be pilfered before it reaches the starving laborers at the front. The weight on your back would be immense, pressing down on your spine, your steps slow and agonizing. You might be leading a mule or an ox, its hooves struggling for purchase on the uneven ground, its braying a mournful counterpoint to your own grunts of exertion. The risks associated with transport were almost as high as those on the wall itself. Supply convoys were vulnerable to bandit attacks, eager to plunder valuable resources. Rivers, while offering a faster route for some heavy goods, were prone to sudden floods, capsizing boats and sending precious supplies and lives to the bottom. Mountain passes were perilous, with the constant threat of landslides or simply losing your footing and plummeting into a ravine, your cargo tumbling after you. And of course, the ever-present hunger and disease stalked the transport routes too, thinning the ranks of porters as effectively as any invader. One particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the lengths they went to. In some remote, mountainous regions, ancient engineers developed a system of sliding timber or stone blocks down specially constructed chutes, or even using rudimentary cableways across valleys to bypass impossible terrain. So, while you might be slogging uphill, some materials might have had a faster, albeit equally precarious, journey. It's an early form of supply chain optimization. Only if your supply chain broke, it could mean hundreds of lives. Makes your last traffic jam look rather trivial, doesn't it? The logistics of water supply were also a constant battle. In arid regions, water had to be hauled for miles from the nearest spring or river, often in heavy ceramic jars or animal bladders. This was a continuous, back-breaking task that never ended, as the demand for water was constant, and the losses due to evaporation or spillage were high. Historians still argue whether the high death toll on the wall was primarily due to the actual construction work or the incredible strain and danger of maintaining the vast logistical network that supported it. From your perspective, slogging through mud with a crushing load, it feels like every single aspect of this imperial project is designed to break you. You might spend days, even weeks, on these supply runs, away from the wall, only to return to the same grim reality of construction. But the experience of the transport route, the sheer endlessness of it, the constant battle against terrain and gravity, only deepens your despair. It's a vivid illustration of how every single component of this enormous undertaking, from the smallest nail to the largest stone, represents an immense expenditure of human life and labor. And you, weary and broken, are just another expendable piece in that vast, nightmarish logistical puzzle. The wall doesn't just consume the land, it consumes the very people who try to feed it. You've been whipped, starved, frozen, baked, and are now perhaps scarred from both injury and the grueling supply runs. Your world has shrunk to the immediate task, the next stone, the next breath. Yet you are not alone. You are one face in a teeming, desperate multitude, sharing this living nightmare with thousands of others. This shared suffering creates a complex tapestry of human interaction, a blend of camaraderie, suspicion, and often profound indifference. Look around you. The faces are gaunt, etched with exhaustion and despair, but they are incredibly diverse. There are farmers like yourself, ripped from their ancestral lands. There are criminals condemned to forced labor as punishment, their crimes perhaps real, perhaps fabricated. There are captured enemies, former soldiers from rival states, now stripped of their arms and forced to build the very wall intended to keep their people out. There might even be scholars or artists, whose education counted for nothing in the face of imperial decree, their delicate hands now calloused and bleeding. Mainstream historical fact. The labor force for the Great Wall was incredibly diverse, composed of conscripted peasants, soldiers, convicted criminals, and even political dissidents, reflecting the vast reach of the imperial state. It's a truly motley crew, united only by their shared misery and the oppressive weight of the empire. In such extreme conditions, human nature often reveals its rawest forms. You might find a fleeting moment of connection with a fellow sufferer. Perhaps it's a shared glance of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of mutual pain. Maybe someone offers you a rare, tiny piece of their meager ration, a gesture of unexpected kindness that shines like a beacon in the darkness. You might form a bond with a handful of others in your work team, a silent pact of mutual support, helping each other lift a heavy stone or covering for a moment of weakness when the overseer isn't looking. These tiny acts of solidarity are precious, almost sacred, lifelines in an otherwise brutal existence. They're like finding a perfectly intact, still warm slice of pizza after a week of foraging for grass. Almost miraculous. However, suspicion and self-preservation are equally, if not more, prevalent. Every man is fighting for his own survival. A dropped tool, a spilled bucket of water, a misplaced brick, any mistake can bring the wrath of the overseer not just on the individual, but on the entire group. This fosters a climate where reporting someone else's mistake, or even actively sabotaging them, might be seen as a way to avoid punishment for yourself. You learn to be wary, to trust sparingly, and to guard your own meager possessions and strength fiercely. There's a constant low hum of tension, a nervous energy that makes truly relaxing impossible, even among your own kind. One particularly quirky tidbit. Despite the brutal conditions, there are fragmented historical accounts, often gleaned from folk tales and later poems, that speak of moments of incredible human ingenuity and even dark humor among the laborers. Perhaps a clever way to fool an overseer, a shared, whispered joke about the absurdity of their suffering, or the invention of a crude song to lighten the unbearable monotony of the work. These tiny sparks of humanity, while rare, provided momentary relief from the crushing despair. I mean, if you can't laugh at the fact you're building a giant wall with a spoon, what can you laugh at? Really? The vast majority of your interactions, however, are likely to be superficial, transactional. You are moving alongside strangers, your bodies pressed together in the human chain, but your minds often locked in their own private hells. You see people arrive, full of a desperate hope that slowly extinguishes, leaving behind hollowed-out eyes. You see them sicken, weaken, and disappear. There's no time for grieving, no space for sentimentality. The flow of new conscripts is constant, a fresh supply of bodies to replace those who perish, ensuring that the work never stops. Historians still argue whether the extreme conditions fostered widespread rebellion and dissent among the laborers, or if the constant threat of punishment and the sheer exhaustion largely suppressed such movements. For you, living through it, any thought of organized rebellion feels like a ridiculous fantasy. You are too hungry, too tired, too broken to even contemplate it. Your focus is on the next breath, the next step, the next lift. The faces around you are simply reflections of your own fading humanity, and the grim knowledge that you are all connected, not by choice, but by a shared, inescapable fate. You might offer a silent prayer for the man who collapsed beside you, or curse the one who bumped your load, but mostly you just keep moving, a single, anonymous figure in a vast, suffering crowd, united by the wall that consumes you all. Your body is a wreck, your spirit is tattered, and the social dynamics of the camp swing between fleeting camaraderie and stark self-preservation. But perhaps the heaviest burden you carry isn't the stones or the tools. It's the invisible weight of profound psychological torment. The Great Wall isn't just a physical barrier. It's a monument to the crushing of the human spirit. Imagine the relentless monotony. Day in, day out, the same backbreaking tasks. Digging, lifting, carrying, placing. There's no sense of progress in the grand scheme, only the immediate, never-ending demands of the next stone, the next bucket of earth. Your mind, once capable of dreams and aspirations, now feels dull and heavy, trapped in a repetitive loop. There's no intellectual stimulation, no creative outlet, no escape from the relentless grind. Your thoughts become as heavy and slow as the stones you carry. You might try to cling to memories of home, of family, of a life before this nightmare, but they grow fainter with each passing day, becoming fragile, easily shattered wisps against the harsh reality of your present. It's like being stuck in a particularly boring, yet extremely painful video game level that never ends. And there's no reset button. The pervasive sense of hopelessness is a far more insidious killer than any disease or injury. You wake each morning not with a renewed sense of purpose, but with a profound dread of the day ahead, knowing it will bring only more pain, more hunger, and more exhaustion. There's no end in sight. The wall stretches endlessly, a monstrous serpent devouring the landscape, and you are trapped within its coils. There's no retirement plan, no pension, no promise of release. Your fate is sealed. You will work until you can no longer work, and then you will die. This stark realization gnaws at you constantly, eroding your will to even continue breathing. Mainstream historical fact. The psychological impact of forced labor, harsh conditions, and the near certainty of death led to widespread despair, mental breakdown, and a profound loss of identity among the laborers on the Great Wall. This wasn't merely physical exhaustion. It was a soul-crushing experience. The human mind is remarkably resilient, but even it has its breaking point. The constant fear is another heavy burden. Fear of the overseer's whip, fear of a falling rock, fear of the next wave of disease, fear of simply not being strong enough to keep up. This fear is a low, persistent thrum beneath the surface of your consciousness, occasionally spiking into acute terror with a sudden shout or a crack of the whip. It keeps you perpetually on edge, preventing any true relaxation, even during the brief, fitful moments of rest. You learn to live with a knot in your stomach, a tightness in your chest, a constant awareness of danger. One quirky tidbit about the mental state. Historical anecdotes, though difficult to verify, sometimes speak of laborers engaging in a form of mental escape, perhaps by obsessively counting individual bricks or fixating on tiny, insignificant details just to keep their minds from succumbing to the overwhelming reality. It's a primitive form of coping mechanism, a way to create a tiny, controllable universe within the chaos. You might find yourself staring at a particular pattern in a rock, tracing its lines, anything to distract from the present agony. It's like playing Sudoku in your head while being actively mauled by a grizzly bear. The loss of identity is perhaps the most profound psychological trauma. You were once someone's child, perhaps a spouse, a parent, a member of a community with a name and a story. Now, you are nameless, faceless, stripped of everything that made you an individual. Your life has been reduced to your labor, your purpose to serving an abstract imperial will. There's no room for personal ambition, no space for individual expression. You are interchangeable, disposable. This dehumanization chips away at your sense of self, leaving an empty void where your personality once was. Historians still argue whether the scale of the wall's construction was intended to instill national unity and pride, or if it was simply a colossal display of power designed to crush dissent and consolidate imperial control. From your perspective, it feels like the latter. You are a tool of oppression, not an instrument of national glory. Your mind, once a vibrant tapestry of memories and hopes, is now a desolate wasteland, populated only by the shadows of fear and resignation. Sleep brings no true escape, only brief periods of unconsciousness from which you awaken to the same grim reality. You are, in essence, a ghost of your former self, a living testament to the human cost of empire, slowly but surely succumbing to the psychological burden that ensures you wouldn't last a day. You are a living ghost, hollowed out by physical pain and psychological despair. The monotony of labor, the constant fear, the gnawing hunger, they've all conspired to chip away at your will to live. Yet, for some, a flicker of that will remains, enough to contemplate the impossible. Escape. The idea is seductive, a desperate whisper in the darkest corners of your mind. But to flee the Great Wall is not merely to walk away. It is to challenge the very might of the Empire, a gamble with stakes far higher than any you've ever known. Consider the odds. First, the wall itself is designed to be a barrier not just to invaders but to those within. While not every section was perfectly patrolled, the sheer scale of the project means you are often in remote, uninhabited wilderness. Where would you go? Back home, if you even knew the direction, would be a journey of weeks or months, across the very same treacherous terrain that broke you during the forced march. And now you'd be doing it alone, without the meager rations or the dubious protection of a convoy. The immediate obstacles are immense. You are surrounded by overseers and armed guards, whose primary job is to keep you working and to prevent exactly this kind of attempt. Their vigilance is constant, particularly as night falls. Getting away undetected would require cunning and luck. Mainstream historical fact: desertion was a serious problem for the imperial authorities, and severe penalties, including death, were common for those caught attempting to flee the Great Wall construction sites. This wasn't a minor infraction. It was an act of profound rebellion. Even if you managed to slip past the guards, you faced the environment. Remember those extremes of heat and cold, the lack of water, the unforgiving terrain? Now, you face them alone, without even the crude shelter of the camps. You'd be hunted, not just by imperial patrols, but by local villagers hoping for a reward. There would be no food, save what you could forage, and no clean water. You'd be a fugitive, constantly looking over your shoulder, every rustle in the leaves, every distant sound, sending a jolt of terror through your emaciated frame. One particularly quirky tidbit: some desperate laborers, particularly those from coastal regions, would attempt to head east, hoping to reach the sea and find passage on a fishing boat or merchant vessel. This was an incredibly long and dangerous journey, often ending in starvation, capture, or being lost at sea. But for some, the lure of escaping the landlocked nightmare of the wall was too strong to resist. It makes your last missed flight connection seem quite trivial, doesn't it? The consequences of capture are universally understood and brutally enforced. There's no court, no trial, no mercy. If you're caught, you'll be brought back, often beaten publicly as a warning to others. Your punishment might involve being worked even harder, given even less food, or assigned to the most dangerous, unforgiving tasks. Or, more likely, you'd be executed on the spot, your body left as a gruesome deterrent, a chilling message carved into the very landscape. The sight of a captured, broken escapee, dragged back to the camp, was a powerful tool of psychological control, extinguishing any nascent hope in the hearts of other laborers. The mental battle is as fierce as the physical one. The constant internal debate: endure this living hell or risk a swift, terrifying end? The fear of the unknown, the certainty of pain if caught, often outweighs the desperation to be free. Most simply succumb to the despair, choosing the slow, agonizing death of labor over the swift, terrifying death of rebellion. Historians still argue whether the high number of deaths on the wall points to a lack of successful escape attempts or simply the brutal efficiency with which they were suppressed. For you, the answer is irrelevant. The choice is a torment. You might see a fellow laborer vanish, a quiet disappearance in the night. For a brief moment, you allow yourself to imagine their freedom, a fleeting fantasy of untouched fields and clean water. But then the overseer's shout brings you crashing back to reality, the weight of the stone in your hands a stark reminder of your chains. The wall is not just built of earth and stone. It is built of shattered dreams and the extinguished hopes of countless individuals who dared to imagine a life beyond its shadow. You remain trapped, the idea of escape a painful, tantalizing mirage, proving once again that your modern will to freedom wouldn't last a day against such overwhelming odds. You've clung to life with a tenacity that would astonish your modern self, enduring torturous conditions, gnawing hunger, brutal overseers, and the crushing weight of despair. You've even considered the desperate gamble of escape, only to pull back from the terrifying precipice. But for almost every laborer on the Great Wall, the story ends not with a triumphant return home, nor with a successful escape, but with a grim, unceremonious, and often solitary death, much like the one that awaits you. There's no heroic last stand, no dramatic sacrifice for the cause. Your end comes quietly, often in the cold, crowded darkness of your makeshift shelter, or perhaps mid-stride, your body simply giving out under the impossible demands. It might be the culmination of weeks of dysentery, your emaciated body finally succumbing to dehydration and infection. Perhaps it's a fever, shaking you with chills one moment, burning you with delirium the next, until your consciousness simply fades. Or it could be a swift, brutal accident. A misplaced foot on a slippery rock, a collapse of a section of uncompleted wall, a blow from an overseer's stick that goes just a little too far. One moment you are breathing, suffering. The next you are not. Your last breath is likely a ragged gasp, unremarked upon by those around you, who are too focused on their own survival to notice. There's no priest, no last rites, no comforting hand. Just the cold indifference of the hard earth beneath you and the distant sounds of the wall's relentless construction. Your body, already a skeletal shell, is finally free from pain. It's a peaceful thought, until you consider the manner of your disposal. Mainstream historical fact: millions of laborers are estimated to have died during the construction of the Great Wall, leading to the grim folk saying that every stone cost a life. Bodies were rarely given proper burials. Instead, they were often interred directly into the wall's foundations, buried in mass graves near the construction sites, or simply left unburied to be consumed by scavengers. This was not due to malice, but due to the overwhelming number of casualties and the pragmatic need to continue construction without delay. Imagine the dawn after you've passed. The overseers, doing their morning rounds, will spot your still form. A rough kick might be administered just to be sure. There's no emotion, no recognition of your lost individuality. You are simply one less pair of hands, one less mouth to feed. Your body, once a vibrant vessel, is now just an obstacle. You might be dragged a short distance away, unceremoniously dumped into a shallow pit, perhaps alongside a dozen other anonymous bodies from the night before, their limbs tangled together in a macabre embrace. A thin layer of earth might be kicked over you, or you might be left exposed, a stark warning to any who might think of faltering. A particularly quirky tidbit that speaks to the sheer scale of death. There are legends, passed down through generations, that the cries of the dead laborers can still be heard within the wall, particularly on windy nights. While certainly folklore, it reflects the deep cultural memory of the immense suffering and the belief that the wall literally consumed human lives. Perhaps your final, silent scream is now trapped within those ancient stones. It's a rather morbid lullaby, isn't it? Your belongings, if you had any left, would be quickly appropriated by the overseers or scavenged by other desperate laborers. Your name, your village, your life story, all utterly forgotten, vanished into the dust and the vastness of the landscape. You become part of the wall in a way you never imagined, not as a living builder, but as a silent, anonymous component of its very structure. Your bones, mixed with earth and stone, become part of the foundation, another unseen layer in the colossal edifice. Historians still argue whether these practices were universal across all dynasties and sections of the wall, or if local customs and resource availability led to variations in the disposal of the dead. But for you, the reality is stark. You are gone. Your efforts, your pain, your very existence have been subsumed by the monumental task. There's no legacy beyond your literal incorporation into the wall itself. Your journey ends not with defiance or triumph, but with the quiet, inevitable expiration that was the fate of so many. The wall continues to rise, fed by the endless supply of lives, including yours, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that you, with your modern sensibilities and fragile body, wouldn't last a day. Your contribution is complete, not by choice, but by the cessation of your life. Your journey, a brutal, relentless testament to the human cost of empire, has reached its inevitable conclusion. You are gone, your body now an anonymous part of the earth, perhaps even literally within the wall's foundations. Yet the wall itself remains. This colossal structure, a testament to unimaginable suffering, stands as one of the most enduring, recognizable symbols of human endeavor on Earth. Your individual suffering, while profound, has contributed to a legacy that stretches across millennia, a silent, stark reminder of what humanity is capable of, both in creation and destruction. Centuries, even millennia, have passed since your last breath. The dynasties that commanded your labor have risen and fallen, their emperors long turned to dust. The invaders you toiled to keep out, the very reason for your relentless work, have long since passed into history, some even becoming part of the culture your wall sought to exclude. Yet the Great Wall persists. Mainstream historical fact. The Great Wall, as we largely know it today, is a patchwork of constructions and repairs spanning over 2,000 years, with significant contributions from dynasties like Qin, Han, and especially Ming. Its very existence is a testament to the cumulative effort of countless generations, many of whom met the same grim fate as you. From a distance, it is a majestic sight, an ancient serpent winding its way across rugged mountains and vast plains, an architectural marvel visible even from space, or so the popular, slightly exaggerated, myth goes. Closer up, the restored sections gleam under the sun, a tourist attraction drawing millions, who marvel at its scale and history, perhaps unaware of the raw human agony etched into every stone. They walk where you once crawled, they snap photos where you once collapsed. Your unseen contribution forms the very ground beneath their feet. The wall's legacy is complex and continues to be debated. Was it truly effective as a military defense? In many instances, no. Invaders often found ways around it or bribed their way through. Was it a symbol of national unity? A grand project to forge a collective identity? Perhaps, but for you and your fellow laborers, it was undoubtedly a symbol of brutal oppression and forced servitude. What cannot be debated, however, is its sheer scale and the unprecedented human cost. It is a monument built on the backs of millions, on their sweat, their blood, and their lost lives. One particularly quirky tidbit that reflects its enduring mystique. Chinese folklore is rich with stories about the wall, often personifying it as a dragon or a living entity. Perhaps the most famous is the legend of Meng Jiangnu, whose tears were said to have caused a section of the wall to collapse, revealing her husband's bones buried within. These stories, while mythical, encapsulate the deep emotional and tragic connection the Chinese people have with this monumental structure and the human suffering it represents. Your own tears, unseen and unheard, are also part of that legacy. The wall stands as a physical manifestation of immense power and control. It reminds us of an era when individual life held little value against the grand designs of empires. It highlights the staggering capacity of humanity for collective action, both for good and for ill. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about progress, sacrifice, and the morality of absolute power. Historians still argue whether the wall's enduring cultural significance outweighs its practical military utility, or if its primary value was always as a symbol of imperial strength and a tool for internal control. For you, now a silent part of its structure, its legacy is undeniable and inescapable. So, as you fade into the annals of history, a nameless statistic among millions, the wall continues its silent vigil. It is the longest cemetery in the world, a testament to the lives consumed in its making. It is a place where you, with your modern comforts and sensibilities, truly wouldn't last a day. But in your brief, agonizing time, you became part of something truly eternal, a physical echo of immense suffering and an equally immense human will to build, even under the most brutal conditions. Your anonymous legacy is carved into the very landscape, a permanent mark left by the countless souls who, like you, perished in its construction. And in that, perhaps, there is a strange, unsettling, and powerful immortality.